Hey everyone. So
Hey,
let's
Becky.
start off
Randy.
strong. That's good.
We're getting there.
Hi there. Just took a while to unmute.
It happens to the best of us. It's always a very stressful moment, but it's like, why can't I find the unmute button at this moment?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I found it, but it wasn't responding to my clicking, and then it finally did.
Or that.
You're right.
Last night in land use. I'm trying to unmute and I've been called on and nothing's happening. They had it under control. Maybe too much.
I had to play the role of IT for that one person who couldn't get the Zoom going. So
Yeah, well, you did a good job. I'll hire you next time. City should hire you for that matter.
I think the city
All
did.
right. Yeah, it is
And
7 o'clock.
and paid him
So,
accordingly.
Miss Delaney, are you ready?
Sure, just a moment.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
Okay, good evening. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety and Transportation Committee on Wednesday, March 5th. The start of the meeting, I am joined by Councillor Block from Ward 4, Councillor Downs, Vice Chair of the Committee from Ward 5, Councillor Lucas from Ward 2, Councillor Bixby from Ward 6, Councillor Wright from Ward 3, and Councillor Greenberg from Ward 1. I also see we've been joined by Captain Devine from the Police Department. Welcome. And we have two items tonight. The first is 365-24, discussion and possible ordinance change on residential parking programs and fee structures. We took this up on October 9th and held it. And Councillor Downs, let me turn it over to you. I know you've been doing a lot of work on this behind the scenes and would love to hear where we're at and where you'd like to focus the discussion tonight.
Right, so there are two items, one's permits and one's tickets.
So why don't I
So,
put the both on officially? So 364-24 as well, which is a discussion possible ordinance change on the categories and levels of parking fines. So that way
right,
we can discuss them together.
right. My object here, and I think that of the committee, is not to gratuitously raise a lot of extra money for the city, but just to be fair and in sync with our neighboring communities. So we have a couple of things I think we can just raise to a very high, just looking through things. And I hope everybody got and has the ticket costs compared across nearby communities. That was emailed earlier. I'll give you a minute or two to open that if you haven't already. And I'm happy to run through it on a sort of high level, which is where I think we probably ought to leave it um, at a high level, and then decide if we want to take some action. But I think one of our decisions is um, on the permits. I'm not thinking we want to get into the commercial permits, which Traffic Council has set up with varying prices depending on whether you pay a meter or not. Thinking more about residential, as it says in our docket item. Currently $25 a year is all we charge. And then of course the ticket for parking overtime is 15, which you don't get if you have a permit. Seems like a really good deal. I think the problem we identified is that the guest passes are also free. So I would suggest two things. And see if the commit, I would even do it as a motion if the committee is willing to do that. One is to eliminate the free guest permit without having bought a permit at all. Because that's what makes it so difficult to administer this program or outsource it or make it a service that we can offer online because no one will pick it up. And the second is to think about whether $25 a year is enough. Or whether that price should go up. So why don't we open that up for discussion, and then I'll make a motion if people are interested.
All right, let me also just recognize Captain Devine. I don't know if you want to add anything at this point. I know you've contributed behind the scenes. If you want to add something, you're certainly welcome to. If you don't want to, that's fine as well.
The only thing I would add is obviously if I don't have the exact statistical numbers, I say if there's 100 people coming in for these permits, I'm saying probably 75 to 80% would just get the guest permits.
Right.
So, and then like Councilor Down says, 25 we can argue is way not. I mean, I don't have an opinion on the lowness, like obviously, but it's kind of like out of touch with what's going on now. And then 80% of people just get the free one. So it's I think that needs to be addressed too, in a way.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay.
Well, people know it's free, so why pay for anything if you know it's going to be free anyway, right?
Right, and I wanted to acknowledge how much work Captain Devine has done on this. He's really been tremendously helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Okay, so we have some hands up. Councillor Lucas and then Councillor Greenberg.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Downs, are you saying that it is $25 a year for a neighborhood parking pass? Is that what you're saying?
Right. For those areas that have a permit program for residents, it is currently $25. And that's for the paid permit. Okay, there are, as Captain Devine noted, there are also a bunch of people who just get the free guest permits. You can get up to 2, I think, without paying at all.
So let me just I just want to make sure I get this right, okay?
Mhm.
So if I live in a neighborhood parking plan neighborhood, I wanted a parking pass, I wouldn't pay for the $25 one. What I'm hearing is that folks are just picking up the free guest parking one and then using that as their own.
So if you're, for instance, living near Newton North High School,
Yeah.
you're in the Tiger area, you have to pay a permit to park on the street for longer than whatever the time restriction is, 2 hours, 1 hour, whatever it is. And some are Tiger permit only, so you wouldn't be able to park there, but some are only by neighborhood permit. That's what you're paying for, is the ability to park on your own street. And yeah, you can use, Captain Devine, I think you can answer that question, but I think you can use it on your own car.
Yeah,
You don't have to pay for one right now.
yeah. Let me give you a good example of the way. So people who need more than 2, that's when they kind of go and pay for the sticker. The sticker gets attached specifically to that car. So you'd bring in your registration, and it would go to that Land Rover or to that Toyota, whatever. Now, when you have the guest permits, it can go to any car. So, I mean, people only get the stickers when they really have to, because the sticker applies to one car, but the 2 guest passes applies to your friends, your family, your kids, your whatever. So it's really very little interest for people to pay for the sticker, other than they need that third, basically, placard or sticker. So just another quick point on it is typically we give 1 sticker or 2 stickers max to a family, and 2 guest permits. So you don't get 1 sticker and 2 guest passes and another, so you can have 2 and 4. The only people who get 3 per residence, or maybe if someone has a psychiatric, like, or a therapist type of thing where they can prove they have a business at that location, then they're allowed to get the additional guest permit.
Okay, so forgive me, so can we not change the rules where you can only get a guest parking pass if you pay for a regular residential parking pass? Is that not a?
That's
Well,
what I'm suggesting we
yeah.
might want to do.
This is in the city ordinance. We can't tell people no. People says, no, I just want the 2 guest permits. And we're like, okay, that's your choice. And we don't have that authority to say, no, you need a sticker too. And it's just,
Okay, so I mean, I'm not too crazy about increasing fines, but closing the loophole would make more sense. That's where I'm at. So I want to hear what other people have to say, of course, but I'd rather close the loophole than just raise the cost. Thank you.
Counselor Greenberg.
Thank you. Could someone explain the rationale of how that originated, where if you went for a permit, that you would be allowed to get 2 free ones without paying for the permit? Was there some reason for that?
I can't tell you when the ordinance was established or when it was changed. I could tell you sitting in that traffic bureau as a patrolman for 18 years, it's been that way for as long as I can remember. I don't know the logic behind why we issue 2 permits.
Yeah, offhand, it doesn't seem to make sense that if we have a permit parking program in a neighborhood, that we would allow folks to have it for free. So I would be good with changing that. Thank you.
Counselor Block.
I'm going to take a stab at a rationale, which is most people have a garage, bless you, or a driveway to use for their vehicles. And so they may think of the guest passes as literally for guests. It's true they could use them for their own car, and maybe some do. I think, if we really want to dive into this, maybe we should ask them. We could do a little survey, and if there are only 100 people who do this, shouldn't be too hard to get a little data. But that's my guess, that if we changed our policy such that you had to buy the sticker in order to get a guest pass too, and maybe we would charge for the guest passes or not. I'm not sure what the pros and cons would be of that. There might be quite a few people who say, well, I don't really need a sticker for my own car because I park in the driveway all the time. So I'm just speculating that might have been how this program got structured in the first place, and there is some logic to it, but then it leads to the situation we have now where people just pick up the free guest passes. So why not just start charging for every pass? I mean, you can get the sticker for your car for, let's say, $25. And if you want 2 guest passes, that's another $50. Instead of sort of trying to wrap them up in a way, and if somebody doesn't want the sticker for their car because they don't need it, they just want the guest passes, maybe it's okay, just charge $25 a guest pass too. That's just my thought at the moment.
Thank you, Counselor Bixby.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I just had a question. How do people get these? They have to go to the police department now to get them?
Yes,
Is
you got
that
a
correct?
person to present a license and registration and proof that you live at that residence.
And you have to do
Pretty-
that every year and then
Yeah,
pay
so
every year?
Every year, and then to December, we have new colored guest permits and new stickers. Obviously, you deal with something like BC. Who knows how many kids at BC might want to try to come in and get. That's why we want verification you're living at your address, because in Crosby Road, Wobbin Hill Road North, all those streets down there, you'd have all these BC kids come in, which is why we require it. You have to come in person and show us some proof that you live there.
And that's the same for guest and for resident passes. Okay, thanks. That's just a helpful piece of information.
Thanks. So I have a question about where this is most frequently used. So I think the first question, and maybe Captain Devine, you can answer this. I'm assuming when people come in, you have a list of all the streets that this applies to,
Yes.
right? How many streets are on that list about?
It's hard to say because like each year we're kind of adding new streets and taking away new streets. Like if you look at the Charles Bank Road area, we just added 2 more streets, and I don't know how many dozens of streets are on it, but usually they apply to like areas like along Boston College, Wobbin Hill Road North, Crosby Road. Then you look at Newton Center, you got Pelham Street, around Newton North High School, all those streets over there. There was like dozens or so streets in that permit area. Auburndale has their street. So I could try to find a number of how it is, but I don't think we have the exact number for you. It would be just a
Nope.
guess.
We have a number in Newton Highlands and in Waban as well that are around. In Waban, it's around the school because we needed some teacher parking. So we gave teachers permits, but we also gave residents permits on parts of Beacon and Devonshire and Wabanff, and then in Newton Highlands and Auburndale and places like that where you have a mix of residents and commercial permits. The residents on those residential streets qualify for permits as well. And I think David limits the total number of commercial permits or whatever he calls them, DINCOs, so that you're not overwhelmed on any one street by, you have 2 or 3, and then residents can fill in the rest if there's high demand for them, but it's in high demand areas.
And do you find a concentration of certain streets or certain neighborhoods where these are more popular, or do you find that they're pretty evenly spread among the list of streets that you have?
I would say they're pretty evenly spread. Obviously, any street that had requested, residents had done that for a reason many years ago. And once the residents know about the permits, and obviously if it's a permit street, they can't park on it during the day for whatever reason, so they're going to come in and get their permits.
Okay. We're being joined by a number of counselors, by the way, so I want to make sure I recognize everybody. Early on, we were joined by Counselor Lipoff. We have also been joined by Counselor Maliki, Counselor Farrell, and Counselor Oliver. Okay, do we have other comments or questions on this particular topic, which right now is about primarily about the guest permit fee? Counselor Wright.
I like Counselor's Block idea is just charge $25 for all of them. Is there a reason why we don't charge $25 for the resident sticker? Or if you want to do the resident one, charge $20 or $15, and then the guest 25.
I'm just thinking out loud about it. I have to imagine, and Counselor Downs and Captain Devine, correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, but let's say you're a homeowner on those streets and there's no parking on your street, but you have a driveway. If you have somebody coming to do HVAC work at your home and they need to park on the street, I can sort of see why in the origin of this, we didn't want to charge somebody to have to buy a permit so they could have a service provider come and, stop by their house. But I have to say that I think Counselor Block was going, to my mind so far, makes the most sense, because the way it's actually being utilized doesn't sound like kind of how it was intended. What do you think?
So if I may, when you have someone in to do work, unless it's longer term, you don't need a permit for them. You can call the police and say, hey, I know we have permit only, but I've got this guy, and they can get a temporary permit waiver that doesn't cost anything, as far as I know. Am I correct with that? So that's not the reason for doing a permit. The permit is so that you and your guests can park on your street, even though we've restricted parking for everyone else.
And
Can I just comment?
Hold on. First of all, we've been joined by Counselor Baker. Second of all, Captain Devine, you respond next, and then Counselor Wright will come to you.
I apologize. Before we kind of go into the second question, I just want to answer Counselor Downs' question. We do have a special program called construction permits. So even if you live on, we'll give Crosby Road the example. If they're having some kind of work done where they have all these different trucks coming in, they can come in for, it's good for 30 days. It costs $10. And if a construction company's having 4 cars come in, we could do 4 cars. If we see like a major project, like they're doing something down in the Housing Authority over by 82 Highland Street, where there's so many more cars, we're not going to flood Crosby Road with more than they can handle. We'll figure out a solution where we could park them on side streets. But if you're having like 2 guys come in or 2 construction companies come in for whatever, it's good for up to 3 months and $10 a month.
so I was told in Boston is if you have a commercial plate, they kind of give you a pass on parking in resident only places and stuff. I get the tickets because I don't have a commercial plate, but that's what I've been told.
And I can tell you in my neighborhood, there are a couple of people who have commercial vehicles who would love to take advantage of that. And, but they live here.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't limit. So if Mrs. Smith wants to come in for two guest permits and it's on Crosby Road again, we're not asking if it's commercial or not. It's good for the two vehicles that Mrs. Smith wants to use them for. So if Mrs. Smith also has construction, she can use her 2 guest passes for the construction people, or she could tell them, hey, go to the Newton Police Department, you can get a 30-day pass for $10.
Okay.
So the permits are really so that, sometimes your garage where you store your car most of the time is not convenient. And so you rely on being able to park on the street. Sometimes your front door is closer to the street than it is to your garage or your driveway. And sometimes you just have, folks who have a regular bridge club or something, and they want those folks to be able to park on the street and visit them. And I think all of, I'm not going to judge how you use the parking permits. I think they're good to have. And I think the usefulness of parking permits where we have high demand, sometimes commuters, sometimes commercial, like going into Newton Center, sometimes it's around Newton Highlands where we have 2 T stops. A lot of people will try to park there near the Ainger School, and also where there's a T stop. We have high demand. Charles Bank Road has high demand, and Newton North has high demand. That's where we start putting in permit parking only, so we can restrict the number of cars that can go over the time limit, because residents also need to be able to park during the day. I just am wondering, I think I'm hearing, and I will make a motion when we're ready to, and I'm assuming this is how we do it. So we'll come back with actual language if we need to, but make a motion that sends to the committee that the city start charging for the guest passes the same as they do for the resident permits. Per 25 bucks a year is a pretty good deal for a parking spot. I know in Newtonville, the guy found out that he couldn't park on the street all night and asked whether he could, work something out with his neighbors. The lowest price he got was $1,500
I mean, it's a pretty good deal, in all honesty.
for the winter.
No, not only is it a pretty good deal of $25, it's also a pretty good deal when you get them for free. So it's like
It's an even better deal when you get them
it's
for free,
and
but
even you can make an argument 25 is very reasonable, or we could always go higher if that's what the council thinks would be appropriate for whatever's I guess the going rate these days.
right. I don't think 1,500 is where we want to go, but I think we could
Yeah.
go higher than 25. But at this point, I'd be willing just to fix that one loophole, just so that it's possible for us to then look at what it would take to be able. So during COVID, we managed to do these permits online.
Yep.
And it was an expense because the free permits don't give you any money back. And then we asked, well, can we continue that program online? And the upshot was, no, we can't, because no vendor in their right mind will do this program. They'd lose money. We would have to pay them to do it. And that's not cost effective. It's also not cost effective for us. So we don't do it. And I think for the convenience, you could do $35. But for, if you can take the day off and come in, you could do $25. It's up to the committee. But I think we should explore the idea of charging for guest passes. And I think, I'd love to hear what our colleagues who've come in think about that.
Councilor Downs, let me just ask you a procedural question about your motion. So we obviously, we don't have the
We can't set the
specific
fee, can
language
we?
of the ordinance. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't have the language of the ordinance before
Okay.
us. So, I mean, I suppose I mean, you just made a good point about whether this then would need to have some sort of a referral to
I think it
finance.
would have to go to finance, right?
I think we'd
Finance would have to set that. All right, so we need
So
another
maybe, so what I'm thinking
meeting for
is,
that.
would it make sense for us to essentially take, when the time is, when everybody's ready, a straw poll about the intent? And then offline work with our clerk and our legal department if necessary to figure out the nuts and bolts of what would have to happen for it to be official, because I just don't want to have a positive vote, it goes to full council, and then we have
I think you're right.
us all on our hands.
Can I just
I
add
think-
one little stat before you kind of go on to motions? I emailed the gentleman who kind of oversees the permit, who kind of issues them every day. He said we've sold or issued under the money fine less than 100 permits at the 25, so less than 100, and we've issued over about 600 visitors placards. So
Oh,
that's about
Whoa.
300 people times 2 getting free permits. So
Mhm.
Okay. Do we have other comments or discussion on this topic of the guest permit? Counselor Maliki?
Yeah, I can't remember from the last time we discussed guest permits, but is there anything that prevents the homeowner from using the guest permit for their own cars?
No,
no.
And do you have to buy a resident permit to get any guest permits?
No.
So guest permits are free?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this
That's
makes
the problem. Yeah.
this makes no sense.
that's exactly what we're addressing here, Counselor Maliki. It's
okay.
just that this doesn't seem to be, well, we know it's not economic.
Right.
Beyond that, it also seems to be a little bit too good a deal.
So why have we not fixed this before?
Oh,
And I was
nobody's
on
like-
the committee.
right. Again,
Well-
it's just we've never looked at it really before,
I guess if you want
except to say, why do we have this problem?
I guess if you want to argue from the other perspective, it's like we're charging the residents who own the house, and it's their way of kind of protecting it from BC kids or people shopping all day long. So I guess if you want to make, well, they pay their taxes, like you can hear that, like you hear it every day. So maybe that's the reason why we don't. But like you say, if you look around the whole state, everyone else is charging for permits, and I guess we're not.
Okay. Counselor Maliki, are you all set?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, Counselor Block.
Sergeant Devine was just edging into my question, which is what do neighboring towns do that have a similar kind of situation as we do, and how much do they charge? Do we have a sense of that? Is 25 common or 50, or what do they do where they have this?
I think I looked into that and sent it around, but I will check and see if I have that.
Yeah, you sent around a lot, and I remember looking at it, but it's not in front of me. So thank you, Counselor Downs.
I have parking programs, but not, and I will look at that. I suspect that's not what we're looking at. But not
can call
parking
around tomorrow.
permits.
I can
Sorry,
give a
Cap-
tomorrow an email Councilor Grossman and Councilor Downs like we have in the past, and maybe give them an update on what surrounding towns do to give you more information. See what
Yeah,
information.
Counselor Downs, if you're able to pull it up during this, we can certainly talk about it more. Otherwise, since it looks like the direction we're going to go on this is to take a straw poll, we can also refine what we probably think is an appropriate number. Though to Counselor Downs's point, the finance committee may ultimately have to repeat this part of the discussion itself before the full council lands on a number.
If I may, I think the way to handle this would be to say straw poll on, the 2 policy items. Should we raise the amount that we charge for residential permits, and should we charge for guest permits? Then we'll come back with language. And then I'll look into, or Counselor Block, you can look into what the towns around us charge for their permits. Some of them are free, but it's a crapshoot. Some of them do charge. But send it to finance with that information, have them set the fee, just say that we think it ought to be raised. And we can work from there. Does that sound like a
Yeah, I don't think
strategy?
there's I don't think there's a problem with us having a point of view on what the fee should be with some information behind it, and I need to just talk to the clerk and refresh my memory about what role, if any, finance needs to play. Because I mean, for that matter, I don't know if we need a new docket item or if we need to kind of re-refer it or exactly how that element's going to work. So,
Right.
all right. Well, I think we're at a point where we can certainly take a straw poll on charging something for the guest permit. And it sounded to me like we've been honing in on $25 mostly because that matches the fee of the residential permit. So maybe the consensus that we've reached is that it should cost the same as a residential permit, but I don't think we've had the discussion yet or landed on what a residential permit should cost. Is that a fair summary? Okay, so why
Yeah.
don't we have a straw poll about, let's first have a straw poll, members of the committee, should we charge for guest permits? Yes or no? And let's raise our yellow hands or whatever.
For yes.
Yes. Raise your virtual hand for yes. Okay, so we have unanimous.
We're on this.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, now everybody lower their hand. Next straw poll. Should we charge, or yes, raise your virtual hand if you think the guest permit should be the same cost as a residential permit. Being silent at the moment about what the cost of a residential permit is.
Can I, maybe this
okay.
goes against the straw poll, but is there some option of if you get the resident permit, then you could have slightly cheaper guest passes? I mean, I do see that $75 would be a big, or not 70, well, yeah, if you got all three, that would suddenly be a big change for people.
Well, okay, so but right now, 6 of us think that, and this again, this is not final, this is a straw poll, and there's no rules about straw polls that I know of. So 6 of us think there should be an equivalent charge to a guest permit or residential permit. And I think that probably presumes that the permit is within a certain, range of money. Let's put our hands down. Everybody put your hands down. So the 2 who did not vote in favor of that, Councillor Bixby, I have your thinking of why. Councillor Block, what is your thinking?
I'm trying to put myself in the position of a homeowner who's in one of these districts. Let's say they're in a district because of proximity to Boston College, and the purpose is really to control student parking. That's somebody correct me if I'm wrong and just thinking about this. So they live near Boston College, and we, as a city and certainly as a neighborhood, we want to not allow students just to park there all the time. So now we'd be asking somebody who lives there to pay I don't know, $75. I just need to think about this. Especially for people who, generally speaking, will park in their driveway. They'll park on the street only if it's really convenient and short time. But if somebody's mostly using their driveway, so they're not going to pay for the sticker for their own car, but they do need it for guests. And we want to charge them. I mean, I definitely believe we need to charge them. I'm just not sure about the equivalence with the parking sticker itself. I mean, that there's a logic to that. But I mean, in a way, I'd like to ask some of the people who are in these zones, how they would feel about this. You know,
So,
whatever we land on. Yeah.
so a couple of suggestions on this. One is we probably should hold a public hearing, right? Just to give the public an opportunity to, particularly those in zones, to have an opportunity to tell us their point of view. I think I would support that. But when we're doing conjectures, let's figure also. Okay, I'm in one of these zones, and it's $25 for a residential permit, and it's less for a guest permit. So, what's to stop me from buying just a guest permit? And using that on my car. And it's sort of like, if you're going to charge less for the guest permits, and I'm assuming people don't get 3 permits just out of the blue. They get 3 permits because they might use them and 2 of them are free. They might really think about, do they want 3 permits if they get charged for all 3? But that's sort of playing a little devil's advocate here. What do you think people will do?
Two thoughts in response to the last 2 comments. One is procedural, one is more on the substance. Procedurally, on a public hearing, I definitely support that idea. What I'm struggling with and thinking about it is how to notify appropriately about it in a situation like this. And I don't think we're going to be sending a letter to every abutter on every one of what sounds to me like a pretty extensive list of streets. So I think we would have to be comfortable with the idea that, just because we say we're having one and we put it in our Friday packet, and, wherever it goes from there in terms of people passing around the information, it is somewhat sufficient. I could be wrong about that. That's another question for the clerk, but that's just sort of a complicating factor in my mind. As to the substantive part of it, I think another piece of it that I'm thinking about is having no parking on these streets. In some ways, in many ways, is a benefit we're offering to the abutters on these particular streets to prevent what I would presume they otherwise don't want, which is a parked up street by a whole bunch of people who we don't necessarily want to enable to have cars year round, or additional cars, or essentially use our streets for a free parking lot. And, part of the trade-off of providing that benefit is that we need to come up with a system that sort of regulates it and keeps it in place and is fair to them in the city. So to me, and it was actually your logic, Councilor Block, that led us this way, and Councilor Down's logic too. But so that's sort of where it's going in my mind, is like why it's fair. I'm certainly, we should hear from people. I can't imagine if you asked folks who are currently getting free parking how they feel about suddenly having to pay for parking, that you're going to get a positive answer. But maybe I'm wrong. Councilor Baker.
Oh, wonderful music. I don't know where that comes from, but anyway.
I have no idea.
Anyway, I guess the question is if I assume if someone's getting a free parking like in Monopoly, they don't want to pay for it. I don't think you need to have a public hearing to decide that. I think the question that you may want to ask is there a policy that you can defend as a reasonable basis to try and equalize the opportunity? Because as I heard it from Officer Devine, the guest parkings far outnumber the resident parking, right? So I guess the question is, does the committee have a sense that there ought to be a charge? And if you go to the public will say, who are affected, no, I'd prefer not to pay. And where are you? I mean, do you need to have the public hearing to learn that information, or is it just a matter of saying, we're going to give you enough notice to know that it's coming and be prepared? Or do you say you stage it in over time? That's the question. Public hearings are where you're trying to decide the policy, but if you really know that the public is affected, not going to want it, then are you going to change your mind because you find that out, or you just presume that and make a decision? I'm not a member of the committee, but I'm just curious how this goes forward.
My
Amanda?
thinking is similar to that. Counselor Downs, go ahead.
Yeah, no, there was really in response to Counselor Block's, questions about why these parking programs are in place with the charges and the exemptions that are there. That I thought we might answer with, give us some examples of how you use this program and, why it's important for it to have what's the benefit of that free permit, or are you just getting a free ride? But either way, I agree. It probably isn't going to be hugely popular to get rid of a free program with a paid program. But for the folks who are most affected, but is it fair for the rest of the city to be subsidizing that? And if we do have, 600 additional cars parking on the street that need a place to park, and are willing to do it with a permit, then we might also want to ask, what would you do otherwise if you didn't have this program? So those are my thoughts.
Okay, Counselor Block.
Well, I agreed with everybody that we need to charge for guest passes. I think we're all there. My hesitation was, I guess, first of all, should there be a different price between the two? And after hearing everybody, I'm convinced there shouldn't be. It's probably not easy administratively, and we really don't want people to use the guest passes for their own cars. So we ought to standardize the price. I think the question is just what should that price be? And maybe we're being cautious, it would just be $25 for any of these permits. That's kind of the least amount of change from the current system. I'm not sure if it shouldn't be higher than that, and I would be curious about other towns and how they set this. But that's the big question for me, I guess, at this point. Should be 25, should be 35, should be 50, somewhere in there. And my guess is that we'll find that other towns that have set a fee, it'll be somewhere in that range. It's my guess.
Counselor Lucas.
Thank you. So let me just give you my overall take on this. We should charge for a guest sticker. It should be equal to the residential sticker. Otherwise, if the residential sticker was $100 and a guest was $25, we're going to have the same problem that we have now, where I think the captain said it's 600 people buying the guest parking and like 100 buying the residential parking or whatever the numbers were. We have to close that gap. And the way you close it is make the two amounts equal. That way folks will buy the residential parking permit. That being said, I am of the opinion that we should not raise the residential parking permit. And then my other question, which is related, when would this go into effect?
Okay, so that's actually a perfect transition to, I think, the second straw poll we want to head towards, which is, do we think a residential permit should cost $25 or something more? I don't think we have any advocates for charging less. Counselor Downs, why don't I turn this portion of this particular discussion over to you and what you think in terms of the effective date as well.
I think the effective date will depend on how quickly we move. I'm fairly agnostic about it. When does the permit program change over? I mean, when do people have to renew their permits, Captain Devine?
At the end of December. So we're kind of locked in the end of the year. So if we want to make any changes forward, we change the color pattern on all the guest passes, the color pattern on the sticker, and it'd have to be for 2026.
Does that make sense to people? It makes sense to me that we wait until 2020, until the new year, and we have it come into effect when you would normally be renewing your permit.
Yes, and it actually lines up perfectly with the end of this term as well.
Another good consideration also around LaSalle.
As to Councilor Lucas, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I would be, I'm against raising the $25 for the guest and residential parking, assuming we change the guest parking to 25. I'm against increasing that for 2026. Perhaps yeah, I'm against raising it for now for 2026. Perhaps we should look at 2027 or 2028 in the future. And let's just close the loophole for now and let's see how that goes for folks buying parking passes, residential and guest for next year, and just end it there. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm gonna plead partial ignorance, but I do have a quick question. Where would said fees, regardless of what we are charging, where do they go and how do we intend to use them?
So, Captain Devine, do you want to talk again about where we have parking programs?
As far as my knowledge of it all is we only take check, we take money order, we take no cash. All the checks get sent to City Hall or like once I guess every other week or whenever the parking clerks do it. And I don't know how it's spent or how the money's utilized. That's the question that you're looking at for me, or a different answer?
There might not be anyone on the phone call who can definitively say, hey, we take in the money, we're going to put it to roads, we're going to put it to some other program. I
think it goes into the general fund, and at this rate, we're talking 100 permits a year at $25, so that's $2,500.
Yeah.
I think we can clarify this with our comptroller and with Ms. Lemieux, but my gut reaction is that if you think about the pie chart that Ms. Lemieux always puts up about where our revenue comes from, and there's a teeny tiny slice for, fees, fines, and permits, I think it's there.
Yep, no, fair enough. And I do think, again, I need to catch up on the longer conversation that I know has been going on in PS&T, so I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, at least now. But I do appreciate that, because it does seem to me that 2026 could be a very different parking scenario for the city of Newton, but I think we all know that. So anyway, appreciate it. And I get it. Yeah, small potatoes. Thank you.
Counselor Greenberg.
Thank you. Actually, that just reminded me, if there were to be a change in our overnight parking ban, would that affect the neighborhood parking permit program?
Captain Divine, do you want to?
Nope.
Add more.
The all-night parking ban is completely independent of the residential permit. The residential permit only applies during the business hours. So for instance, we'll just use a street by Newton North. If it come July, someone wants to park there at 7 p.m. at night and keep their car until 11, they don't have a permit, there's no one there to tag it or ticket it. So residential parking only applies to your business days.
Oh, okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
So does that mean it doesn't apply on weekends either?
Well, definitely not Sundays because the PCOs aren't on Sundays. Saturdays, it's a good question. I never thought about Saturdays. I would think that they apply on Saturdays too, because the whole point of it would be to discourage people from parking on Pelham Street in Newton Center, it depends on the street. So yeah, it's I can find that out. I wasn't completely sure, but I believe it does apply to Saturday.
Well, just I suppose as a point of clarification, are we saying it doesn't apply because the law doesn't apply, or it doesn't apply because there's no one there to enforce it?
I'll get that answer to you, and as soon as I get it, I will feed it back to the group. I'm trying to.
Okay, because I was under the impression that it was round the clock thing, not that someone could show up at 7, leave their car there till 2, because that's when the overnight parking ban.
No.
And
Generally, I guess someone used the term before. It's used in different neighborhoods to curb a problem, right? So in the Charles Bank Road area, right, it's people going to work Monday through Friday, leaving their cars there. In the Newton North areas, the students parking in front of whatever street, just Pulsifer Street, just parking. So on a Saturday, the residents don't have the same problems as you have on a Monday or Friday. So, which is why.
I was going to point that out. We have time limits on when the permits are in effect. Pelham Street, I think it is. It has that's an all the time residential only, and I have very rarely seen anybody try to park in those resident spaces. But yeah, around Woburn, it's work days and school days. Around Newton Highlands, it's actually mostly Monday through Friday anyway.
I have to imagine on Woburn Hill Road, though, like in the BC area, it's got to be all the time, because otherwise the whole BC football issue. We have our separate signs there about the parking.
BC footballs.
God, the more we dive into it, the more my head hurts.
Right, that's a different thing. I don't think Saturday, Sunday is usually a problem, and that would be something traffic council would handle. So this is really just, do we start charging more for permits, which is the next question, but do we charge for guest permits, and do we charge the same? I think we've gotten one answer. Do we want to run the straw poll for the second?
So the second being, should
charge the
a
same?
permit? Well, I think we already had the straw poll on should we charge the same? And
Okay.
An answer. So
Okay.
to me, the other straw poll is, should we charge more than $25 for a residential permit?
Okay, and I think we do need more data for that one, because we have been asking, what do other towns charge? I think that's a fair question to have answered first. So why don't we
Hold off on that.
hold off on that and move to the second item?
Well, hold on. First, then, why don't we take a motion to hold for 365-24, which covers the topics that we just talked about?
Do we want to do that, or do we
Or
want
do you want to wait till the end?
Do we want to NAN that?
I don't think we want to NAN it, because I think we wanted to talk about it again once we have more information. Unless you think that.
I thought we were going to possibly come back with a whole new docket item, but I guess we can do it at that time. Yeah, why don't we hold?
Right, so we can always NAN it later. I think the only reason to not take the motion to hold now is if you think that we might want to return to this topic and you want to take the votes on holding at the end.
We might as well do the vote.
Sure. Okay. why don't we go on? We already have formally 364-24 on the table too. So why don't we just start talking about that one? We'll take
Okay.
our votes on holding at the end. So now we're talking about the
Ticket
categories and
costs.
levels of parking fines. So Counselor Downs, why don't you address that piece?
Right. So in the correspondence, which I hope you all read, it was attached to the docket item. We have a couple of items that are on Newton's tickets, which are never used. And Captain Devine suggested we get rid of those. Those are safety zone violations, angle parking only violations, and within service zone violation. Do we need a vote to do that, or can we do a straw poll, or is this something we need to craft language for? What's your sense?
I think it probably depends how it's written in our ordinances, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, we're gonna have to come back for that. Are folks generally comfortable with doing this? Because you know, my feeling is if they're never used, we should get them off the books. And that's just housekeeping.
So I guess my question is, why don't we use them?
I don't know.
They're not really used. Like, I talked to some of the PCOs about this prior to this meeting. I asked, do you ever use the angle parking? Do we all have a copy of a sample of ticket? That's what a ticket book looks like for the officers using the handhelds.
Yeah,
If
that's
the
on
PCO
the doc, it's on the, attached to the agenda.
So if the PCOs use the hand machines, they don't really see these tickets. It's just us who use it. And we never use angle parking. We never use safety zone. We never use within service zone. These are some things that were put on there many years ago before my time here, and I'm not sure why they're there, and they're just never used.
So let's talk about them each, because the angle parking only, I mean, we've created a whole bunch of angle parking areas recently. It would seem to me that.
Yeah, so there's angle.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, actually, hold on a second. We have a couple hands up. And Counselor Bixby had her hand up first. So Counselor Bixby, let me go to you, and then Counselor Wright, I'll go to you. Go ahead, Counselor
I
Bixby.
was going to ask about angle parking because we've created a number of angle parking areas. So please proceed.
And I think Counselor Wright was going to tell us where they are. So Counselor Wright, go
well,
ahead.
angle parking like Albemarle, and I could see people not doing it during the day or whatever, and they just park. Normally, there's not that many cars. They're dropping something off, or they're going the wrong angle or whatever, and they're dropping something off at day. Is that what the angle parking ticket is about? That they're not angle parking?
Right. So what would be, you know, if you're just pulling in and using more than one space, which you can use a different code for that.
Well, and like, what's the difference between angle and angle park only? 31 and 32.
Again, both of those are not. Neither of those are used is the point.
I researched into the city ordinance book to find better definitions or clarity, and I can't find any language to even help clear up the confusion we're having right now.
And have we had anybody from the law department look?
I haven't asked anyone from the law department. I asked the PCOs if they ever used them. It's like, we never ever use those. There's no need for them to really use them.
It seems to me that we should look and see what our ordinances actually say, but it also seems to me that there's an increasing purpose to keep that particular violation in place. I don't really see a big benefit to taking it off, since it's just literally sitting there on the ticket book.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't cause us any harm. It's just sitting there and it's just not used. It's sit there.
I think we need to figure out what the difference between angle and angle park only is, and see if we are going to get rid of it, we have to be sure that if we're messing with ordinances that we actually know what they say. So I think
That's fair.
But why don't we just take a second? What do other people think about keeping it versus getting rid of it? and then assume that this would have to be another straw poll kind of thing where we then have to figure out if there's real language about it. Counselor Wright and then Block.
Yeah, I think we should keep it for now until we find out more information, and especially that we're getting more angle parking in the by Albemarle by day, which I could see violations being there. As a parent used to going there, I could see myself doing something like that.
Yeah, I have to say it's the back in angle parking on Albemarle is, I know it's the right, I know from a safety standpoint there are arguments for it. I find it very stressful. Counselor Block and then Counselor Lucas.
I think in general, there's a reasonable argument for cleaning up something like this if it isn't used at all, or if it's used so rarely, maybe it should be combined. I mean, if once we learn what the angle violation would be and the angle park only violation would be, if they're used so rarely, maybe somehow merging them. All it is the box on here, and these boxes are pretty small. So if we really cared about looking at data about sort of how many different kinds of violations do we write tickets for every month, every year, the fewer there are, the bigger the boxes, the more accurate that will be. So I'm all for trying to simplify this for the PCOs, but also for anybody who's going to crunch some data. Whether what they mean is another story, and we should keep what we need, but what we don't need, we should try and get rid of.
Okay.
Counselor Lucas.
So, Chair, if you're having trouble backing into those parking spots on Albemarle Road, you should hang out with me more often because it's piece of cake for me. Now, granted, I have a somewhat new car. I have the camera in the back, so I can back into any parking stall easily. So, I'll just want to throw that out there.
Well, thank you. I have to say, I can do it. I just find it stressful. Keep going, though.
The other thing is, I would hesitate to remove any of those numbers on the ticket. And Captain, I don't know if it's possible, but could we hear directly or indirectly from the parking enforcement officers? And just, can we get their take on it? Because aren't they the ones who are going to have to issue the tickets? So I want to help them as much as I can. So maybe can we hear from them? Is that possible?
Sure. I mean, if you ever want to have another PS&T meeting, I could try to have one attend, or maybe if a certain amount of city councils want to come down to the police department, I could pull a PCO in and you can hear from them their takes on what is the good tickets or what their logic is behind everything and what they don't use. That's certainly available to you guys.
Okay.
So I think it would be more appropriate to have them come here, particularly since we have a docket item and an open meeting law, that we need to comply with. Though on this one, it sounds like we're indirectly hearing from them that either they don't know what it is or they don't use it.
I mean,
Is it that they don't use it or that they don't know what it is, or both?
both, just like we're seeing right now, what exactly is Angle Park and have you ever used it? Like, no, I asked PCO Blanchard, no, it's just not used. I mean, is this something, I don't even know what it's there for, why you even have it? So.
All right, so the consensus I'm hearing is this one requires more information.
So I'll go look for that. And I think it's fair to, come back at it with some more questions. On the other hand, just because it's been on the books forever doesn't make it, for me, that's not a sacred cow. It's like, if it's something we never use, I kind of agree with Councilor Block. It's easier just not to have it there. And
but I think the
start to deal
bigger
with what you've
question
actually
is,
got. So
Yeah, but wait, Counselor Evans, let me just ask you something about that though.
Mhm.
Isn't the real question not if we never use it, but if we think it should be illegal and finable?
Well, so what I'm hearing from Captain Devine is that there are other parts of the ticket book that function, that the PCOs are using instead. So they, why have two possibilities or three possibilities that they can check off when one will do?
So I guess then the question is, if somebody went into one of these angled parking zones
Right?
and they parked across two spaces, you're essentially saying they would,
There's a
There's not
different
a
part of
one
the
on here.
ticket
Which one
book
is
that
it?
can be used.
I looked at, it popped in my eye and now it's gone. Where is it? What would you use?
I mean, the PCOs, from what they tell me, right, will give loading zone a good area. That's a violation they see sometimes. There's nothing on there for loading zone, so they would use restricted area as
Yeah.
their answer. For someone who might be inconsiderate and park in two spots because they don't want their nice new car being scratched, like, I really don't know what you would do. I don't think the PCOs ever, I mean, they never told me what they would do or something like that. I don't think they really people ticket for that. But this would be like another thing. Like if someone parks awkwardly in an angle spot, maybe kind of takes up two spot, what do you ticket them on? Because there's nothing really that says it on there what you can
Yeah.
ticket on there, other than just being.
Why don't we find out what they're doing now?
Okay, so what's,
Okay.
what's next?
So the other thing I thought we might want to look at is in the chart, which I hope you all had access to, and which our colleagues probably don't have an access to because it was mailed to PSNT. We compared ticket costs across nearby communities. So what does Newton charge, Brookline charge, Waltham charge, Needham charge, and Wellesley charge? And sort of in the big picture, high, 3,000 foot level, Newton kind of falls in between and sometimes significantly behind our neighboring communities. Some of them, and some of them it doesn't. So the question is, and this was brought to my attention because of the chamber's, email that said, or newsletter that said, if you want inexpensive meter violation parking, go to Newton. They have the lowest tickets in the area. And that is partially true. Newton charges, for instance, for parking on a sidewalk, $15, and has since I've been a counselor. We know inflation's gone up since then. Brookline charges 25, Waltham charges 25, and Needham and Wellesley charge 15. And Boston charges 65. So we'll leave, Boston's kind of an outlier, we'll leave it out. But my question to the committee, and again, we'll have to go back in with a more fine tooth comb and write an ordinance, do some ordinance crafting, is do we want to be, more in line with Needham and Wellesley on a lot of these charges? Or do we want to increase to be more in line with Brookline and or Waltham? The only thing where we are clearly in outliers on the spaces for people with accessibility issues, the spaces and blocking a curb cut, where we're charging much more than our peer communities. That was set by the Commission on Disabilities, however. And I'm reluctant to touch that. But so that's the big question. Do we want to be in line with the Brookline and Waltham, or do we want to be in line with Needham and Wellesley, which have much smaller commercial zones and many more driveways?
Counselor Block.
I think that's an interesting question, but I don't think that's the only question. These fines are used, in my mind, sort of two different purposes. One is to One is for safety violations. For example, parking by a fire hydrant. To me, that ought to be the seriousness of the infraction ought to be part of our analysis here, part of our conversation. I mean, I want to know, I want to think about what Brookline and Waltham do, but I also want to think about the seriousness of the violation. Um, a meter violation, sort of less so than, say, a fire hydrant violation. So I think that just needs to be part of our analysis. There's another aspect of this, which is simply the price of parking. And every so often we have a mostly theoretical discussion about, you know, how do we set the price of parking so that we improve our traffic flow? I guess to the extent that there's a connection between parking and traffic, we certainly don't want people circling, wasting time and gas and creating congestion. And part of the answer to that is raising the price of parking so that people move sooner, and you create more available parking spaces by doing that. So I think there's some analysis that goes along with what do other towns do. So and I don't pretend that there are easy answers to these questions, but I think we need to dig into them.
One thought just to add to that, Councillor Block, and I'm coming to you, Councillor Greenberg, is to me, I think we also need to try to understand, if we can, how big of a problem is this in our community right now? Like, if we had people parking in front of fire hydrants I agree, if somebody's parking in front of a fire hydrant, that should be a much higher fine than a meter violation. I think I also want to understand, is this something that happens very often in our community or not? And are some of these violations that are happening regularly such that to curb the behavior, the fine should be more? Councillor Greenberg.
Oh, I agree totally, Chair. Thank you. I really do think we need to concentrate on the seriousness of the violation and have it match the charge of the ticket. Like crosswalks, bus stops, and fire hydrant, I think, are just way underpriced for a ticket. So thank you.
I feel that way about sidewalks too.
Yeah,
On sidewalks.
safety zone also.
We're not quite sure what safety zone is, Councillor Greenberg.
Is that not the new safety?
No.
Oh, it's different?
Mhm.
Oh. So I don't know. That's what I thought.
And I agree with Councillor Block. It is about so tickets are all about deterrence, right? Because we can't be everywhere. So you want to make the cost of non-compliance high enough to deter a behavior. And we want to deter unsafe behaviors maybe at a higher level, but we still might want to look at sidewalk, parking on sidewalks, double parking, which I think is a safety violation as well as a huge annoyance. And, overtime and meter violation parking is about deterring people from just paying the meter or overstaying the time limit because it's really not going to cost them enough money for them to bother. Now, of course, they're $15 per violation, but I do think it's worth having a look at why, whether this is the appropriate level. And I just noticed there's pretty much a bright line. One exception is bus stops, and we can come back to that. but there are some violations here where Needham and Wellesley charge significantly less than any other abutting community. Brookline, Waltham, and Boston charge significantly more, and we're kind of deciding which one we want to align with. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring to the committee on a really high level before we get into the specifics of hydrant, sidewalk, double parking, and you know, the exact violations. Just say, where do we want to line up?
Counselor Lucas?
Thank you. Captain, a question on the sidewalk violation. Would that be an example of a car parking on the street along the sidewalk where they're not allowed to park?
No, it'd be literally parking on top of a sidewalk.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, I used to do that when I lived in Brighton all the time. It was on the Newton border. It was in Brighton, but it was near the Newton border. Everyone in the neighborhood did it because the roadway was small and the curb was, small too. So everyone just all the time, I'm telling you, and it was a non-issue. So it's cars parking on the sidewalk. Okay. So then forgive me, what is the fine for cars parking on the street along the sidewalk where they're not supposed to park? What would that
Well,
be?
that could be a restricted area one. It could be restricted area probably be
It'll be what?
The restricted area.
Restricted area. And what would a double parking be on this list? Would that be restricted area too?
No, I believe double parking has its own one. If you look, number 10, it's a $15 fine. It's when people park more than 12 inches from the curb, almost just parking like 3 feet from the curb.
I
and then
see it.
Double parking. So
I see it. Okay. It's still $15. Okay.
yes.
Also, while we're here, can I make a request for more enforcement on Walnut Street in Newtonville Square?
And yeah, we could. I got the PCOs go down tomorrow, sir.
Yeah, it's bad whenever I drive through there. It just is. I don't know why you have that big parking lot behind, underneath the Austin Street building. So, but anyway, that's a little pet peeve of mine. But thank you. And yeah, I do recommend we eventually hold this item tonight because it does require further analysis. Thank you.
So my gut reaction in terms of what we should be in line with, I guess I'm having a hard time answering it because as I look at the ticket cost comparisons, I don't really see like a consensus on the numbers that I feel most comfortable with. Like when I look at the handicap space line, for example. Well, actually, we charge more than other people, which I think we should. So I'm like good with where we are there. But there are some where like a community like Wellesley charges more and Boston charges less, and ones where Boston charge more and the other charge less. So I guess my gut reaction right now, if I'm trying to summarize how I feel, is that for the violations that we feel are safety measures, I want to be in line with the high number, whoever the high number is. And for ones that are more minor, I want to be in line with the median or average, approximately. I don't want to go below where we are right now. But I certainly would be comfortable going up on ones that are significant safety problems. And Captain Devine, can I just ask you, do any of these stand out to you as particularly problematic in Newton? Like we have a lot of X violation that are particularly of the public safety nature ones.
No, obviously the PCO is pretty much right. The meter violations, that's their big ticket generator. I would say just doing like the grant lately. I've been doing the bike pedestrian grant. These Uber Eats drivers just always double park on Center Street, and like I think Council Lucas said probably the same thing in Newtonville, where everyone's working to run into like Tango Mango or one of the places, and they just park wherever they want because they just think, oh, I'm there for 5 minutes, and they come back out. So to me, I think that's the new thing. These Uber Eats and these drivers for fast food places are just parking wherever they want and just putting their flashes on, blocking up traffic.
That makes sense to me. Councillor Downs, in terms of, oh, we have a hand from Councillor Greenberg. Go ahead, Councillor Greenberg.
Oh, thank you. I just have a quick question. What would be the ticket for parking in a bike lane?
I would go with the restricted area, $20.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That was it. Thank you.
So that would seem to me that $20 is too low,
I agree. Yeah.
park in a bike lane.
Okay.
It seems to me like we probably need a new violation for that that's higher.
All right, so we have a lot of them here, and I don't want to go into this at 8 o'clock at night individually. So why don't we take it as homework to go through as counselors, think about which ones we want to go higher. I'll put together a suggestion. We can come back at that. Does that make
gonna say,
sense? Can
I
we do
thi-
that under open meeting law?
Well, I think what makes sense to me, tell me if this makes sense to you, Counselor Jones, would be to add another column to the ticket cost comparison list labeled proposal and fill in a number based on what we heard tonight, what you see on this chart that makes sense to you and or to whoever else you want to, collaborate with. And because I actually think that if we had the chart on the screen in front of us with the proposed number, it's easier to say yes, no, fix this one
Okay.
as a committee. But then it also, in terms of homework, that also brings to my mind, is this also have to be a finance decision?
It would. And
So
we could come in and just say, we think it should go higher, we think it should go X higher, and finance can slap it down if they want. But we need to come up with our rationale for that, which is the deterrence effect, as well as, not, we want to deter, for instance, that double parking in front of Tango Mango and Annie's Taqueria.
So I think my primary homework that I've written down is on the first docket item on our agenda. Well, actually, for both of them, is to find out exactly where the ordinance language lives for these things to figure out if essentially what we need to do is be making ordinance amendments, and then procedurally figure out, do we need a new docket item? Or can we re-refer the docket item we have to finance? And then I also wrote down to ask the law department if they can help us figure out specifically the angle parking violations, what they are. And it seems to me that we probably need the same inquiry on what safety zone is and means with
I
respect to
couldn't
this.
find it in the ordinances. I went and looked,
Um,
as did Captain Divine.
right. So,
We have no idea what that is.
So then on your proposal chart, if you think that one should go away, then I would write delete in the
Okay.
text next to that
Right.
one.
Okay.
And then maybe, I mean, ideally, I don't know if they would be willing to do this, but ideally someone from the law department who
Goes through with us.
knows where all this is in the ordinance would come and participate.
Yes, I think it's not just law, but it's also Mr. Kozis, to
Right.
me, has the most comprehensive view of anyone in the city on what are the parking funds and why do we have maybe not why we have them, but what are the parking regs and where are they?
Right. Where do they live?
Well, I think a lot. Some of them live in the TPR, the Traffic and Parking Controls Registry, and some of them live in the ordinances, and so he might know where those are. So let's loop him in for a meeting.
Right. Because also, if they're in the TPR, does that mean that gets referred to Traffic Council?
We could do them, and Traffic Council could, Traffic Council does tweak them, but they don't do fines. They just know where they are, where the regulations are.
Councilor Bixby, I saw a hand from you before. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to ask about the ordinances piece too. I think it would be, I know, especially since some of these might be in multiple places, I think it would be helpful to see the language associated with each of these as we're deciding, because I do think there might be pieces we're missing a little bit, or, especially things like the 12 inches away from the curb, and also double parking, if those things are combined in some way, those might be two slightly separate thoughts. So it would be helpful to see exactly the language that we're adjusting an associated fine with. Thanks.
Okay. Counselor Downs, what else do you think we need to talk about tonight to be able to move the ball forward?
It would be helpful to hear from folks who want to differentiate between safety violations and parking management violations. I mean, do we look at over and winter night parking as a safety or a parking violation, for instance? Is a blue zone, parking in the blue zone, a safety issue or a parking management issue? It'd be helpful to hear from people where they feel we have is blocking a private driveway a safety issue or a parking management issue? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I have three gut reactions on those three questions, if you want to know
Okay,
specifically.
I think, for instance, parking on the sidewalk should be raised because we pay to pave those sidewalks, and when particularly heavy trucks, but also cars park on sidewalks routinely, it breaks them up faster and means that we have to pay more money to replace them. It also makes it impossible for pedestrians to safely use the sidewalk because it takes that space. So I would call that a safety one.
I definitely
Okay.
think that's a safety one. Counselor Wright.
I agree, it's
Yep.
a safety one. One of my pet peeves are people who don't have enough room in their driveway, so their cars hang over the sidewalk and it forces pedestrians into the street. So I think that's a safety issue.
So one where we ask our police to have some discretion because there are some areas where parking is very, very tight and families have a hard time managing with very small cars when they have to put in car seats. And that's another issue, but it is one where it is particularly people, and they do this on Chestnut all the time because it's narrow, will pull up onto the sidewalk and park on it. And it's brand new sidewalk that's about to buckle under now.
I
Anyone
would
else?
say blocking the blue zone, in my view, is definitely a safety issue. Those blue zones are, if they're not well controlled and respected, they can be extremely treacherous. So that one is pretty serious to me. I think blocking a private driveway is also serious and a safety issue. I mean, granted, in many cases, it's an annoyance or an inconvenience, but I've had situations where I've gotten blocked in and I've needed to be able to arrive somewhere to pick up a child and can't. So, or God forbid, somebody has a medical situation and needs to be able to
Right.
get out. So I see that. I mean, it's a little bit less of a safety issue than some of the others if I'm ranking them, but I still see that as a safety issue.
I wouldn't rank them. And one that where I had some questions was near a fire station. Do we call it's not one that we use very often, but do we want to increase the fine on that one?
On
Is
being
that a safety one?
near, show me say that one again.
It's 3 down, 2 near a fire station. We charge $15. Waltham charges 100. Nobody else has it as a violation.
I mean, that's interesting. I'm trying to think of a scenario. I'm trying to think of our different fire stations and the setups.
Fire station one
end up
across from the
being too near to
YMCA.
How far are you supposed to park away from it? It wouldn't even occur to me to park near her,
Right in the way of the fire
the
station.
way
I
of the
know,
fire
but-
station.
Blocking snow removal is another one. So you parked on the street when it's a snow emergency or when we're trying to plow the streets. We have a $20 fine. Waltham charges 25. Is it a safety issue?
I would think so.
I do too. I mean, if it prevents us from being able to appropriately remove
streets.
snow. And this time, when we weren't able to remove snow in time, we ended up with sheets of ice in place.
Right.
Oh, I know. There was a boulder across from one of my friends. On the bus stop issue, we charge 15. Everyone else charges 100. The state charges 100.
I think that's a safety issue because people
100.
can't get off and on the bus safely.
So the bus stop thing is that the state law for all of the T bus stops would mean $100 fine. But because we have a $15 fine, there's some discretion involved and some wiggle room. Do we want to just clean that up and make it $100 so we don't have that issue at all? No one has to worry about who's giving the ticket.
I think so.
Yeah.
Councilor Greenberg, you've patiently had your hand up. Did you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think they're mostly all safety issues except for it'd be easier to pick out the ones that are just parking management issues like cab stand. I don't even think there are any more cab stands.
There
Commercial-
too.
Are there? Oh,
Mhm.
commercial night parking. I
Where's
think-
the cab stands?
There's one on Union Street, and I believe there's one in Woburn Square still.
That's right. So I think then otherwise, commercial night parking and meter violation and overtime parking are the only three that I see that are not safety issues.
And the overnight parking. What about wrong direction parking on a bridge? I don't know about those.
I have a question about I'll wait my turn.
Yeah, hold on a sec. So, Councilor Greenberg, your hand is still up. Did you have more you wanted to say right now?
No, that was it. I just saw that most of them do meet the safety qualification more than parking management.
Okay, Councilor Block.
I just wanted to pick up on that question. There probably are safety components to every single one of these, but for some it's more than others. And if it isn't sort of either or, then you know, let's do a 10-point scale, and you know, we can all pick a number for each one of these, with being, you know, with 10 being the most serious safety implication for the violation, and 1 being the least. I like the label of parking management because I do think that's how some of these work. I'm not sure about the bridge. I mean, there could be safety issues on a bridge that I'm not imagining, but that feels like a parking management issue as opposed to a safety issue. I don't know if the bridge itself is that the structure of the bridge is that a fact. I mean, somebody could tell me that it is if people park on it a lot, and that could be a factor. But I think we probably need to go through each one of these and tease them out. And I think we'll probably have a lot of consensus on it too. That's it.
I'll just say on the bridge issue, it strikes me as it probably is a safety issue. I know where my children go to camp out in Great Barrington, they've had to completely shut down 2 separate bridges, which have essentially cut off huge swaths of neighborhoods from routes out to sort of the central part of their community. And it makes what should be a 1-minute drive, a 30-minute drive, and it's years in the future before seeing these things reopen. Now, I don't know that parking lots of cars necessarily contributes to it, but
Well, I
uh,
just on the bridge over the Pike, on Highland Street, I think it is, where the First Unitarian Universalist Society Church is located, which I'm familiar with. That somehow that started getting enforced at some point, and we were all parking on the bridge on Sunday, and then it got enforced, so people got tickets, and you stop parking on the bridge. So I don't. There may be situations in which bridges are more of a safety issue than others. I don't pretend to know whether there are different implications for different bridges. This is getting pretty deep. Anyway, that's
Right.
it for now.
Agreed. Counselor Wright and then Bixby.
So maybe this is for Officer Devine. So Boston allows parking on bridges and they have meters. And I want to see parking on Chestnut Street for officers only, so that police officers only, so we can free up some of the Davis Street parking for residents for West Newton. So I wanted to see why we can't allow on certain bridges parking. Boston does it. They have meters, physically meters over the Mass Pike on on most of their bridges, at least where I go down. So is there a reason why we don't have parking on bridges? Some bridges are kind of narrow, and I can understand there's not a lot of room.
I mean, it's a good question. It's been established since I've been a police officer for 20 years that we just don't park on bridges for safety reasons.
But what's safety? I don't think it's a weight thing. And cars don't really weigh that much. I can understand bridges aren't that wide. And so what I want to see, which I'm going to be pushing, is on Chestnut Street going southbound, is allow just police parking only on the bridge. And because you guys keep taking up more and more of Davis Street, and give us back Davis Street for residents to park in the square, because we just don't have enough parking in West Newton Square.
I mean, that 25 Chestnut Street in another year is going to be a bigger facility, so the parking is only going to have to expand, because that's what we're going to be putting in training facility. At least that's what they tell us what they're planning to do with 25 Chestnut Street. So, I mean,
well, there's a parking
All right,
lot a
now
couple
I'm totally confused.
So
there's a
this
parking
is
lot
getting a
a few
little
blocks.
offline. But
Yeah, hold on, because we just had a whole debate about 25 Chestnut Street. Correct me if I'm wrong.
A question we need to bring back to the committee and get answers to is why no parking on bridges? I believe it's structural, but Councilor Wright, maybe you can find that out.
Okay, I will, and I'll go ask the law department, because Boston does it across the Pike all the time, all over the place with meters.
It may be a public facilities type question. You might
I
have
was
to
gonna
go
say,
to DPW.
I don't think it's a law department question. I think it's a DPW and a Commissioner Morse question. Counselor Bixby, did you have your hand up?
And Commissioner who?
Morse.
Morse.
He
okay.
seems, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
for example, he was very involved. I mean, when we've had bridge issues, I usually hear from him in some
Okay. I'll ask.
capacity. So he seems to be potentially knowledgeable about this kind of thing as well.
Okay, and then the police, there's a parking lot a few blocks away that maybe, and that's another discussion we can have. Taking away prime parking from residents in West Newton Square is not a good thing.
Hey, I have a visitor. She's probably a lot bigger than the last time you guys saw her. So,
Yes.
yeah, anyway, I'm now thoroughly confused about 25 Chestnut Street, because I thought we just heard the other night that the police don't need 8 spaces, but I don't know. Counselor Bixby, did you have more you wanted to say?
My apologies. I feel like I keep raising and lowering my hands, depending on how the conversation's going. I would urge us to get some answers to these questions before we start to make any decisions, both about the ordinances and to the extent that we have it, any history behind why these things are in place so that, we have the full picture before we make changes or removal of these pieces or, raising the prices. So that's all at the moment. Thanks.
Counselor Downs, what else do we need guidance on?
I think we're fine. I'm gonna start putting together a proposal and I'm gonna start doing some of the homework. So I will make a motion to hold.
Okay, so we have a motion to hold both of these, I'm presuming. So let's take them up in the order on our agenda. 365-24, motion to hold. Any discussion about that?
I have
Okay.
one more question for Captain Devine while I have us all here though.
Sure, go ahead.
When someone parks without a permit, what's the ticket written? What do we use? Restricted area? Okay, so we just increase the fine for that and we're all set. Okay, thanks. Any discussion?
Discussion on the motion to hold? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of hold, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so that's held. Then 364-24, we have a motion to hold from Counselor Downs. Any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so that's held as well. I have some homework. Counselor Downs has some homework. Counselor Wright, you have some homework. And we are adjourned for tonight. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
Aye.
You want to say goodnight? You want to wave bye?
Have a good night.
Good night.